The Amazon looks open on a map. It is not. From space, it appears as one continuous green surface, stretching across more than 5.5 million square kilometers. It spans 9 countries and drains the largest river basin on Earth. The Amazon River alone carries more water than any other river on the planet. But scale is only the first barrier. Step beneath the canopy, and the world changes immediately. Sunlight fades, direction blurs. The forest ceiling rises 30, 40, sometimes 60 meters above the ground, layered so thick that even satellites struggle to see what lies below. GPS signals weaken, trails vanish within weeks. Seasonal floods can raise water levels by more than 10 meters, turning solid ground into temporary lakes and erasing roots that existed months before. This forest creates much of its own weather. Through evapotranspiration, it releases billions of tons of water vapor into the atmosphere each day, helping drive rainfall across South America and beyond. It is vast, it is alive, and it is constantly rewriting itself. Scientists have studied the Amazon for decades. Thousands of species have been documented, yet new ones are still discovered every year. Entire regions remain difficult to access, not because they are forbidden, but because reaching them requires time, coordination, and enormous effort. The deeper you go, the less fixed the landscape becomes. So why does something this immense remain only partially understood? What makes navigation here so unreliable? How can a forest shape its own climate? And why, even in the age of satellites and drones, does so much of it remain biologically underexplored? Tonight, we travel into the parts of the Amazon that maps cannot fully capture, not to conquer it, but to understand why it resists being fully known. Before we begin, if you're already enjoying this peaceful moment, it would mean the world to me if you gave this video a gentle like, maybe even subscribed if you'd like more sleepy science stories like this. And if you'd be so kind, let me know in the comments, where are you winding down from tonight, and what time is it there? I love watching our little bedtime map light up, one dreamer at a time. Now take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let's begin. Distance reshapes time long before it reshapes land. In the Amazon basin, journeys are measured less by maps and more by endurance. The forest stretches across the northern half of South America, flowing through Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. Political borders exist on paper, yet beneath the canopy they dissolve into continuous green, an ecological expanse that pays little attention to lines drawn by governments. The basin itself covers more than 5.5 million square kilometers, an area comparable to the entire European Union and larger than most individual continents except Asia and Africa. Within it flows the Amazon River system, the largest drainage basin on Earth, gathering rainfall from thousands of tributaries that weave across mountains, plateaus, and lowlands before converging toward the Atlantic. Water from the Andes may travel thousands of kilometers before meeting the sea, carried through channels that branch and rejoin like veins in a living body. Scale in this context is not an abstraction, it alters the mathematics of movement. Reaching a remote field site can require days by boat, followed by overland treks through terrain without roads. Supplies must be transported along rivers that curve and double back, adding distance where maps suggest simplicity. Each additional kilometer compounds fuel demands, coordination, and time. A journey that appears short in isolation becomes formidable when multiplied across such breadth. Remoteness expands alongside size. A small clearing cut for research may sit hundreds of kilometers from the nearest hospital, airstrip, or communication tower. Emergency response stretches thin over such magnitude. Even satellite communication, reliable elsewhere, depends on line of sight that forest structure often disrupts. Helicopter range limits, river depth variations, and seasonal weather shifts all compress operational windows into narrow bands. The Amazon River and its tributaries form an intricate network that both enables and constrains access. Channels that serve as highways in one season may become labyrinths in another as sediment shifts or water levels recede. Tributaries intersect at angles that obscure direct routes, forcing long detours. The larger the system, the more pathways exist, yet the more complex navigation becomes. Logistical planning in a basin of this scale resembles coordinating across small nations rather than single parks. Permits must align across jurisdictions, research teams synchronize across borders, and environmental variability demands contingency plans for conditions that can differ dramatically within a single expedition. What begins as a straightforward objective slowly unfolds into layered preparation. Vastness alone does not make exploration impossible, yet it magnifies every challenge. Each river bend, each ridgeline, each political boundary adds another variable. Size multiplies uncertainty, and uncertainty stretches distance further still, until the forest feels less like a place on a map and more like an expanding horizon that recedes as one moves toward it. Above the forest floor, space folds into layers long before the sky appears. Trunks rise in pale columns, straight and patient, climbing past 50 meters and sometimes nearing 80 before their crowns unfold into sunlight. From below, the upper world is hidden by an intricate architecture of leaves, branches, and interwoven lianas that knit the air into something almost solid. The canopy is not a single ceiling, but a succession of tiers, each intercepting light, wind, and rain before they can travel farther down. The highest emergent trees form scattered pillars, lifting broad crowns above the general cover. Beneath them stretches the primary canopy, dense and continuous, where neighboring trees lean together and close every visible gap. Below that lies a subcanopy of younger trunks and shade-tolerant species, followed by the understory, where broad leaves turn themselves carefully toward faint glimmers of brightness. By the time light filters to the forest floor, it arrives softened and scattered, reduced to a dim green radiance that shifts with the smallest movement above. This layered structure is a triumph of ecological efficiency. Photosynthesis unfolds at multiple heights, capturing sunlight in stages rather than allowing it to spill unused to the ground. The price of this abundance is opacity. From orbit, satellites detect an uninterrupted surface of chlorophyll, a textured expanse that reflects and absorbs in complex patterns. Optical sensors rely on visible wavelengths that cannot easily pass through overlapping foliage. What lies beneath becomes a shadowed unknown, inferred through indirect measurements of heat, moisture, and spectral signature rather than direct sight. Even high-resolution aerial photography encounters the same barrier. Aircraft can capture astonishing detail of the canopy's surface, tracing individual crowns and mapping subtle variations in color that hint at species composition. Yet the lens sees only the uppermost leaves, fallen logs, streams concealed under vines, and clearings hidden within the understory remain invisible from above. Light detection and ranging technologies can penetrate small openings, sending pulses that slip between leaves and return fragments of vertical structure. Still, coverage depends on angle, density, and season, and the resulting images require careful interpretation. Closer to the trees, unmanned aerial vehicles meet another set of limits. Turbulent air currents swirl unpredictably around tall trunks. Branches extend at uneven heights, and vines create suspended obstacles that are difficult for onboard sensors to detect in time. Under the canopy, satellite positioning weakens, and signal loss complicates navigation algorithms designed for open skies. Pilots often rely on cautious, slow movement, accepting reduced range in exchange for safety. The canopy wall is less a single obstacle than a living shield, formed by growth layered upon growth. It gathers sunlight for the forest while withholding clarity from those who approach it from above. Beneath that shelter, complexity deepens, sheltered and unseen, shaped by light that arrives only in fragments. Moisture rises invisibly from leaves long before clouds gather overhead. Across the basin, countless stomata open with daylight, releasing water vapor drawn upward from soil through roots and trunks. This steady exhalation, repeated by billions of trees, lifts vast quantities of moisture into the lower atmosphere each day. Scientists often describe the process as a biotic pump, a living mechanism in which vegetation does not merely respond to climate, but actively helps generate it. As vapor accumulates, it cools and condenses into clouds that drift and thicken, forming broad currents of humid air, sometimes called atmospheric rivers. These streams travel across the continent, bending with prevailing winds and redistributing rainfall far beyond the forest itself. In this way, transpiration links canopy to sky, forest to distant grasslands and cities, creating circulation patterns rooted in biology as much as physics. Rain does not arrive solely from distant oceans. A significant portion falls from water that has already passed through leaves, risen, condensed, and returned. Droplets strike crowns, cascade down bark, seep into soil, and begin the cycle again. Evapotranspiration becomes not a background process, but a central rhythm, shaping humidity levels and cloud formation with remarkable consistency. The forest recycles its own moisture several times before it finally drifts seaward. This internal circulation lends the region a dynamic stability. Temperatures remain relatively even throughout the year, buffered by continual cloud cover and moisture release. Yet within that apparent steadiness, localized storms can build quickly. Solar heating during clear intervals strengthens convection, sending columns of warm, moist air upward where they meet cooler layers and condense rapidly. Thunderheads swell within hours, releasing intense rainfall and frequent lightning strikes that arc between cloud and canopy. Lightning density in the basin ranks among the highest on Earth. Electrical discharges ignite occasional fires in drier seasons, altering patches of vegetation and contributing to mosaic landscapes that shift gradually over time. For researchers, these sudden atmospheric changes complicate planning. Clear mornings may give way to heavy downpours by afternoon, swelling tributaries and grounding aircraft. Equipment must endure high humidity punctuated by abrupt cooling and electrical interference. Weather models, though increasingly refined, still grapple with the intricacy of these interactions. Cloud formation depends on aerosols from plant emissions, rising thermals from uneven heating, and feedback loops between moisture and vegetation density. Small variations in forest cover can influence rainfall distribution across wide regions, demonstrating how tightly coupled land and sky remain. In the Amazon, climate is not imposed from above alone. It emerges from within, breathed upward in fine, continuous currents that gather into storms and return again as rain. Exploration unfolds beneath this living atmosphere, guided by forecasts that account for patterns, yet always leave room for the forest's subtle adjustments. The ground does not always remain where it seems to be. In wide stretches of the basin, what feels solid beneath one season's boots will later lie silent under dark, slow-moving water. With the arrival of the wet months, rivers swell beyond their banks and spread laterally into the forest, transforming lowland corridors into vast aquatic plains known as Varja and Igapo. These flooded forests are not anomalies, but recurring states, woven into the annual pulse of the region. Water levels can rise by more than 15 meters in certain areas, lifting entire ecosystems into suspension. Tree trunks that once stood dry along narrow channels become partially submerged for weeks or months at a time. Species adapted to these cycles anchor themselves with specialized roots, tolerating low oxygen conditions, while fish drift between branches far above the usual shoreline. The forest does not retreat, it reorganizes, accepting the river as a temporary architect. In Varja zones, nutrient rich sediment carried from distant highlands settles across the floodplain, replenishing soils and supporting diverse plant communities. Igapo regions, fed by darker, nutrient poorer waters, sustain a different assemblage of species that thrive in quieter currents. Each type of flooded forest carries its own texture, sound, and rhythm, yet both share a common trait. They are landscapes defined by movement rather than fixity. As water advances, leaf litter loosens and travels, accumulating in floating mats of vegetation that drift slowly through submerged groves. These rafts shelter insects, amphibians, and small reptiles while redistributing organic material across new ground. When floodwaters recede, they leave behind altered terrain. Channels carved by temporary currents linger as shallow depressions. Young seedlings establish themselves along fresh sediment. Fallen trunks settle in new orientations. For those attempting to chart this terrain, permanence becomes elusive. A map drawn during low water may bear little resemblance to conditions months later. Trails, once traced between tree bases, vanish beneath silt or are redirected by new inlets. Campsites selected for elevation can find themselves at the edge of rising channels the following year. Even satellite-derived topography struggles to capture the full variability of these transitions as surface contours shift with each cycle. The flooded forest blurs distinctions between land and river, revealing them as phases rather than opposites. Aquatic and terrestrial systems interlace, sharing nutrients and species through repeated immersion. Fish feed on fruits that drop from overhanging branches. Seeds disperse through currents to distant clearings. Life here anticipates inundation, folding flexibility into its design. When waters retreat and ground reemerges, the memory of submersion remains etched in bark stains and sediment layers. Yet already the basin prepares for another ascent, another reshaping. The forest endures not by resisting water, but by allowing it to pass through, revising its contours in quiet, cyclical motions that leave no season entirely the same as the last. Beneath the towering growth and seasonal waters lies a paradox concealed in rust-colored earth. The ground of much of the Amazon basin appears rich at first glance, darkened by constant leaf fall and shaded by continuous vegetation, yet its underlying chemistry tells a quieter story. These soils, often classified as lateritic or oxasols, have endured millions of years of rainfall that has leached away soluble nutrients. What remains is heavily weathered substrate, rich in iron and aluminum oxides, but comparatively poor in phosphorus, calcium, and other elements that sustained agriculture depends upon. Fertility, where it exists, rests in a surprisingly thin layer near the surface. Fallen leaves, branches, and organic debris decompose rapidly in the warm, moist conditions, returning nutrients not to deep reserves but almost immediately to roots waiting just beneath the litter. Mycorrhizal fungi weave delicate networks between trees, channeling minerals through symbiotic exchanges that keep growth sustained despite limited storage below. Nutrient cycling moves swiftly, circulating through living tissue rather than accumulating in the soil itself. This design favors continuity of forest cover. When vegetation remains intact, the cycle hums steadily, each generation of leaves nourishing the next. When that cover is removed, however, the illusion of abundance fades. Exposed soils, no longer protected by canopy or root systems, lose structure under heavy rain. Nutrients wash away, and the remaining substrate hardens or erodes. Crops planted without replenishment often show declining yields within a few harvests, revealing the fragility beneath the greenery. For ancient settlements that once flourished in certain regions, this delicate balance shaped their legacy. Structures built from timber and earth returned quickly to the ground after abandonment. Without continual maintenance, wooden beams succumbed to decay, and compacted earthen walls softened under repeated wet seasons. Stone, where used, remained scattered rather than monumental. In most areas, the forest advanced quietly across plazas and pathways, reclaiming clearings within years. Only in places where communities engineered richer soils, known today as terra preta, did more enduring fertility persist. There, charcoal, organic waste, and careful management created darker earth capable of sustaining crops longer than surrounding terrain. Yet, even these anthropogenic soils blend subtly into the forest over time, concealed beneath new growth. Erosion and biological decomposition collaborate efficiently in this climate. Termites dismantle wooden remnants, fungi thread through fibers, roots fracture abandoned foundations. What once stood as organized habitation dissolves into irregular mounds and faint alignments, often indistinguishable from natural formations without careful survey. The land does not resist human presence with dramatic force. Instead, it absorbs it gradually, folding artifacts into cycles of decay and regeneration. In this basin, endurance belongs less to stone or brick than to living systems that continuously reclaim and renew, allowing civilization to pass softly back into soil that was never meant to hold it for long. Patterns sometimes appear first as faint interruptions in uniform green, subtle straight lines where nature rarely draws them. When aircraft equipped with light detection and ranging systems began sweeping across portions of Brazil and Bolivia, pulses of laser light filtered through narrow openings in the canopy and returned with echoes from below. After vegetation was digitally removed, the ground revealed contours that did not match ordinary forest undulation. Grids, causeways, and geometric enclosures emerged from data once thought to hold only trees. These surveys uncovered networks of earthworks spread across wide areas, including circular and rectangular ditches connected by straight roads that extended for kilometers. Some sites displayed raised platforms and embankments arranged with deliberate symmetry, suggesting planned settlements rather than isolated clearings. Elevated agricultural fields appeared alongside habitation zones, constructed to manage seasonal water and maintain crops in challenging soils. The shapes were too precise to be chance, too extensive to belong to a single generation. For centuries, such formations remained concealed not because they were deep underground, but because they blended almost seamlessly into the terrain. After abandonment, earthen walls softened and lowered under rain. Roots pressed gently against embankments, and leaf litter accumulated year after year. What once stood as defined boundaries became subtle ridges, scarcely distinguishable from natural rises. Dense vegetation closed over roads that had once linked communities, weaving continuity where organization had existed. Traditional aerial photography offered little assistance, capturing only uninterrupted canopy. Even researchers traveling on foot often passed near these sites without recognizing them, as irregular ground patterns can resemble natural mounds and depressions. The forest did not destroy these constructions in dramatic fashion, it absorbed them gradually, folding human geometry into ecological form until distinction blurred. The discovery of these hidden cities reframed long held assumptions about the region's past. Earlier narratives portrayed much of the Amazon as sparsely inhabited, its soils thought incapable of supporting complex societies. Yet the scale and coordination implied by these earthworks suggest organized communities with knowledge of hydrology, agriculture, and landscape engineering. Raised fields indicate adaptation to periodic flooding, while straight roads reveal intentional connectivity across challenging terrain. Archaeologists now interpret portions of the basin as a mosaic of managed landscapes rather than untouched wilderness. Evidence of orchards, constructed ponds, and soil enrichment strategies points to sustained stewardship over generations. These findings do not diminish the forest's vitality. Instead, they reveal a layered history in which human presence intertwined with ecological cycles. Beneath the trees, memory rests in contour and alignment. It waits not as towering ruins, but as softened geometry, preserved in elevation differences measured in centimeters rather than meters. Through careful sensing and patient analysis, fragments of earlier worlds come into view, reminding us that what seems wholly natural may carry the quiet imprint of societies that once moved confidently through the same shade. Water here does not follow a single obedient line. It spreads, divides, rejoins, and wanders with a patience measured in centuries. The Amazon River stretches for thousands of kilometers from Andean headwaters to the Atlantic, carrying more fresh water than any other river on Earth. Its discharge shapes coastlines far beyond the forest, yet within the basin itself, the current is rarely confined to a permanent channel. The main stem gathers flow from an immense web of tributaries, each arriving with its own sediment load, chemistry, and seasonal rhythm. Whitewater rivers descend from the Andes, heavy with suspended minerals, staining the current a pale brown. Blackwater tributaries drain ancient lowlands, tinted dark by dissolved organic matter. Clearwater branches slide in from shield regions with comparatively little sediment. Where they converge, gradients shift and banks adjust, redistributing force along new lines of erosion and deposition. Channels migrate gradually across floodplains through a process known as meandering. Outer bends erode under persistent flow, while inner bends accumulate sand and silt. Over time, loops tighten until sections of river cut through narrow necks, abandoning former curves and leaving behind crescent lakes. Entire villages have found the water edging closer year by year, while other settlements wake to discover the current slipping farther away. What seems stable within a season can alter across decades. Sediment movement operates on scales both subtle and dramatic. Fine particles travel long distances before settling, nourishing distant banks. Coarser materials shift along the bottom, reshaping sandbars and redirecting smaller channels. During high discharge, islands of vegetation detach from eroding margins and drift downstream, carrying soil and seedlings with them. These floating mats sometimes anchor against new banks, forming the beginnings of fresh land that may persist or dissolve with the next surge. Riverbank collapse remains an ordinary, quiet event in many stretches. Saturated soils lose cohesion under persistent current and slump into the water, exposing roots that soon dangle before disappearing entirely. Trees tilt and slide, surrendering to a process that neither hastens nor delays for human timelines. For field researchers, camps positioned near stable appearing bluffs must account for this gradual instability, reinforcing structures or relocating with little warning. Mapping such a system demands continuous revision. Satellite imagery can outline present channels, yet without historical context, it may obscure the pace of change. Survey points established along one bank can become obsolete as erosion shifts the shoreline. Tributaries that once offered direct passage may silt up, while new connections open elsewhere. The river's power lies not only in volume, but in its capacity to redefine its own path. Within this hydrological network, predictability softens. Coordinates hold for a time, then yield to movement. The basin's waterways write and rewrite themselves, inscribing transient boundaries that guide exploration today and quietly rearrange tomorrow. Names accumulate more slowly than life itself. Within the Amazon basin, classification lags behind abundance, as if language is always arriving a step after creation. Botanists estimate more than 40,000 species of plants rooted across its varied terrains, from towering hardwoods to delicate understory herbs that bloom briefly in filtered light. Each hectare can contain more tree species than entire temperate countries, their leaves differing in shape, chemistry, and seasonal rhythm in ways that demand careful study. Above and within this botanical foundation moves a vast assembly of animals. Ornithologists have recorded over 1,300 species of birds, their calls layering through dawn and dusk in complex acoustic mosaics. Some specialize in canopy heights, others remain close to the forest floor, while migratory visitors weave in and out with shifting seasons. Mammals, exceeding 400 documented species, range from wide-ranging predators to small nocturnal insectivores, scarcely glimpsed even by seasoned researchers. Yet these counts only hint at a deeper scale. Insect diversity alone is thought to number in the millions, inhabiting niches defined by host plants, microclimates, and fleeting ecological interactions. A single tree can support dozens of beetle species, each adapted to feed on specific tissues. Ant colonies construct elaborate networks beneath the soil, while butterflies, moths, and wasps trace ephemeral pathways between blossoms. Microhabitats exist within fallen logs, suspended bromeliads, and thin layers of bark, each hosting communities seldom encountered beyond a few square meters. Cataloging such diversity presents a challenge that expands with every survey. Field teams may spend weeks sampling a small plot, collecting specimens that later require months of laboratory analysis. Genetic sequencing has revealed cryptic species once grouped under single names, multiplying recognized diversity without adding new territory. In remote areas, logistical constraints limit duration and frequency of expeditions, leaving vast tracts minimally sampled. Even when researchers revisit established sites, seasonal turnover can alter which species are visible at any given time. New discoveries occur each year, from brightly colored frogs to previously unknown tree species bearing fruit high in the canopy. These findings do not represent anomalies, but natural consequences of incomplete sampling in an ecosystem of such breadth. Advances in environmental DNA techniques allow scientists to detect traces of organisms from water or soil samples, offering glimpses of hidden presence. Yet interpretation requires caution and repeated validation. Biodiversity here operates not as a static inventory, but as an evolving tapestry. Species ranges shift with climate variation. Local disturbances create temporary opportunities, and ecological interactions generate subtle feedbacks that influence community composition. The sheer scale of life challenges comprehensive understanding, inviting patience rather than certainty. Within this vast living archive, names are written gradually, each edition acknowledging that the work of recognition continues alongside the forest's quiet, ongoing invention. Long before any root breaks the surface or any wing stirs the air, another world unfolds in darkness measured in millimeters. Within a handful of Amazonian soil, live communities more numerous than the visible forest above. Billions of bacteria occupy each gram, forming intricate consortia that exchange nutrients, decompose organic matter, and regulate the chemistry upon which larger life depends. Their presence is neither loud nor easily seen, yet it underpins every trunk and leaf. These microbial populations vary subtly from ridge to floodplain, from upland clay to sandy terrace. Shifts in moisture, acidity, and organic input create microhabitats where different bacterial lineages flourish. Some specialize in nitrogen fixation, converting atmospheric nitrogen into forms plants can use. Others participate in denitrification, returning nitrogen to the atmosphere. In this constant exchange, invisible metabolisms shape the fertility and resilience of entire landscapes. Threading through the soil are fungal hyphae, slender filaments that weave extensive networks between plant roots. Mycorrhizal associations allow trees to share nutrients and water, extending their reach beyond individual root systems. Certain fungi decompose lignin and cellulose, unlocking energy stored in fallen wood. Others form mutualistic bonds so essential that seedlings struggle to establish without them. These subterranean networks operate as quiet circulatory systems, transferring resources through living connections that rarely reach human sight. Among these microbes lie countless species yet to be described. Genetic sequencing has revealed extraordinary diversity in small soil samples, with many DNA signatures unmatched in existing databases. Some microorganisms remain uncultured, resisting laboratory growth conditions and preserving their secrets within the forest floor. This hidden abundance includes not only beneficial bacteria and fungi, but also pathogens capable of infecting plants, animals, or humans. The medical implications are profound. Soil microbes have historically yielded antibiotics, antifungals, and anti-cancer compounds, discoveries that transformed modern medicine. In the Amazon's microbial diversity, researchers suspect additional chemical pathways waiting to be understood. Novel metabolites may offer treatments for resistant infections or entirely new therapeutic classes. Yet prospecting for such potential demands careful sampling, ethical frameworks, and collaboration with local communities and nations. Despite technological advances, microbial research here remains incomplete. Field collection is constrained by remoteness and limited laboratory infrastructure within vast regions. Sequencing generates immense datasets that require interpretation through bioinformatics pipelines still evolving. Moreover, microbial communities shift with seasonal moisture and subtle environmental gradients, meaning single surveys capture only partial snapshots. The microbial unknown forms a quiet frontier beneath the forest's surface. It is dynamic, responsive, and densely populated beyond easy comprehension. Each sample drawn from the soil carries a fraction of this complexity, suggesting a realm where discovery unfolds gradually, guided by patience and respect for processes that have long preceded human inquiry. Sound often arrives before sight. A thin, persistent hum gathers at the edge of perception, rising and falling with the movement of warm air. In many parts of the Amazon, insects compose a living atmosphere of their own, present in such abundance that they shape daily rhythm as surely as rain or light. Their diversity has already been glimpsed in passing, yet here their physical presence becomes immediate. Mosquitoes thrive in the basin's humidity and standing water, breeding in pools left by receding floods, in tree hollows, and along slow moving margins of creeks. Certain species remain active throughout the day, beneath shaded cover, while others emerge in stronger waves at dusk. Biting flies join them in open areas and along riverbanks, drawn by movement and carbon dioxide. Protective clothing reduces exposure, yet fabric thick enough to deter one species may trap heat and moisture, creating other discomforts that accumulate with time. Ants form another layer of this barrier. Leafcutter columns trace deliberate pathways across the forest floor, transporting fragments many times their size to subterranean chambers where cultivated fungi await. Army ant swarms travel in coordinated fronts, flushing insects and small vertebrates from hiding as they advance. Field researchers must remain attentive to these shifting rivers of arthropods, as a stationary camp can quickly become engulfed if established near an active trail. Termite colonies work more quietly but no less persistently. Mounds rise in varied shapes, some concealed within fallen trunks, others built above ground like sculpted clay. Within them, complex societies regulate temperature and humidity through architectural design. Wooden equipment, tent stakes, and even portions of research platforms may attract their attention if left long enough in contact with soil. Decomposition, a fundamental ecological service, becomes a practical challenge for those attempting to preserve tools and supplies. The cumulative effect of such density extends beyond minor irritation. Swarms interfere with note taking and specimen preparation. Lenses fog and attract small insects. Food must be sealed carefully against contamination. Insect-borne pathogens require vigilance in preventive measures, adding further layers to logistical planning. Field schedules often adjust to peaks in activity, favoring early morning hours before certain species intensify. None of this presence is anomalous. Insects fulfill essential ecological roles, pollinating plants, recycling organic matter, regulating populations, and sustaining birds, amphibians, and mammals. Their overwhelming numbers reflect an ecosystem operating at full capacity. Yet, for human visitors, the concentration can reshape experience, transforming brief observation into sustained negotiation with movement that never fully rests. Within this living barrier, patience becomes part of methodology. Researchers adapt gradually, refining clothing choices, camp placement, and daily routines. The forest's smallest inhabitants thus influence the pace and structure of scientific work, reminding observers that scale is not measured only in kilometers or canopy height, but also in wings beating within arm's reach. Warmth and moisture create conditions where life multiplies with quiet efficiency. In the deep reaches of the Amazon basin, these same conditions shape patterns of disease that are woven into the ecology rather than imposed from outside. Pathogens here do not move independently of environment. They circulate through insects, mammals, and water, following rhythms established by climate and habitat. Malaria remains present in many zones of the basin, transmitted by anopheles, mosquitoes that breed in shaded pools and slow-moving waterways. The parasite's life cycle depends upon both insect and human hosts, aligning with seasons that sustain mosquito populations. In some regions, control efforts have reduced transmission, Yet localized outbreaks persist, where remoteness complicates prevention and treatment. The forest canopy, already known for filtering light, also moderates temperature and humidity, extending breeding conditions across much of the year. Dengue and yellow fever circulate through additional mosquito vectors, some adapted to forest margins and others capable of bridging between wild and human environments. Viral reservoirs may exist within non human primates, allowing transmission cycles to continue even in areas with sparse settlement. Vaccination programs offer protection against yellow fever in many communities, yet maintaining coverage across scattered populations requires continuous coordination. Leishmaniasis, transmitted by small sandflies, reflects another layer of ecological complexity. The parasite develops within insect vectors that thrive in humid, vegetated habitats. Human cases often arise where forest disturbance brings people into closer contact with these vectors, underscoring the link between land use change and disease exposure. Infections may present in cutaneous or visceral forms, each demanding timely diagnosis and sustained therapy. Humidity acts as a quiet facilitator in this network. High moisture levels prolong insect survival and support microbial persistence on surfaces and in water. Warm temperatures accelerate reproductive cycles for many vectors, while dense vegetation provides shelter from wind and direct sunlight. Together, these factors create an environment where transmission can continue with limited seasonal interruption. For researchers and local residents alike, medical support is shaped by geography. Clinics may lie days away by river travel, and heavy rainfall can delay transport further. Air evacuation, when available, depends upon clearings or improvised landing sites that must be maintained despite encroaching growth. Communication infrastructure varies widely, influencing response time during acute illness. Disease ecology here is neither chaotic nor random. It follows biological logic grounded in climate, species interactions, and human movement patterns. Public health initiatives adapt to this context with vector control, vaccination campaigns, and education programs tailored to regional conditions. Yet the interplay between environment and pathogen remains dynamic, adjusting as rainfall patterns shift or new settlements emerge. Within this living system, prevention and preparedness become integral to exploration and daily life. Health is negotiated alongside humidity and terrain, guided by knowledge accumulated through field experience and ongoing research. Color can be a warning long before motion is noticed. On a shaded leaf, a frog, no larger than a thumb, displays brilliant patterns of blue, yellow, or crimson. These poison dart frogs synthesize alkaloid toxins derived from the insects they consume, storing them within their skin as chemical defense. Predators that attempt a bite receive more than flavor. They encounter compounds capable of disrupting nerves and muscle function. The forest does not rely on size alone for protection. It refines chemistry into shield and signal. Along the forest floor and within low branches, snakes move with quieter caution. Several species possess venom delivered through specialized fangs, enzymes, and proteins designed to immobilize prey or deter threat. Hemotoxic venoms interfere with clotting and tissue integrity, while neurotoxic forms interrupt communication between nerve and muscle. Encounters are uncommon when pathways are clear, yet dense understory and fallen debris create places where camouflage serves both reptile and risk. Most snakes withdraw when given space, conserving venom for hunting rather than defense. Insects also contribute to this layered system of protection. Bullet ants, known for one of the most painful stings documented, patrol tree trunks and low vegetation, Their venom contains peptides that overstimulate pain receptors, a deterrent effective against larger animals that might disturb nests. Colonies function with coordination, responding rapidly when vibrations signal intrusion. Though such encounters rarely lead to lasting harm, the immediate intensity reinforces respect for proximity. Plants, too, participate in defensive strategies. Some produce latex rich in irritants that inflame skin upon contact. Others grow spines along stems or leaves, discouraging browsing by mammals and careless handling by humans. Certain species synthesize toxic compounds within leaves or seeds, discouraging consumption unless specific detoxification strategies are present. Chemical ecology here operates as an ongoing dialogue between organism and environment, shaped by evolutionary exchange. In this setting, minor injuries can escalate quickly. High humidity fosters bacterial growth within small cuts or punctures, while persistent moisture slows healing. A scratch acquired during routine movement may require attentive cleaning to prevent infection. Venomous encounters demand prompt assessment, and the time required to reach medical facilities can extend beyond what is available in urban contexts. Preventive preparation becomes part of field methodology, woven quietly into daily practice. These defensive adaptations are not expressions of hostility. They represent survival strategies honed over generations in a landscape dense with interaction. Color, toxin, spine, and sting all contribute to maintaining balance among countless species sharing limited space. For those who enter, awareness becomes essential, not as alarm, but as acknowledgement of a system where protection is built into skin, scale, and leaf. Direction begins to loosen when contrast disappears. In many parts of the Amazon, the eye meets an almost continuous spectrum of green, layered in subtle variations yet rarely interrupted by distant horizons or clear lines. Trunks rise in repeating intervals, foliage overlaps, and depth compresses into a soft wall of color. Without mountains, open plains, or visible skyline, the usual anchors that guide human orientation fade into uniformity. Landmarks exist, yet they are often small and transient. A twisted tree, a fallen log, a bend in a narrow stream may serve as reference points for a time. Hours later, similar shapes appear again, repeating patterns that blur memory and distance. The forest floor shifts gently underfoot, with minor elevation changes too gradual to register without instruments. Even experienced trackers must attend carefully to subtle differences in soil texture or plant distribution to maintain bearings. Magnetic interference in this region remains generally minimal, yet the canopy obscures celestial cues. The sun, filtered and scattered through dense leaves, offers little directional clarity. Shadows fall diffuse rather than sharp, shifting throughout the day without forming reliable compass lines. Cloud cover, frequent and persistent, further reduces external reference. In such conditions, a person may walk in what feels like a straight path, while gradually curving without awareness. Psychological effects accompany this visual consistency. Sensory input remains high, yet differentiation is low. Sound layers continuously as insects, birds, and distant animal movements create a complex auditory field without silence. Combined with humidity and heat, this steady stimulation can produce cognitive fatigue. Attention narrows, and small navigational errors compound quietly. Studies conducted in dense forests across the world have documented a tendency for individuals deprived of strong directional cues to drift into circular paths. Without clear landmarks or visible sun position, Internal estimates of straight movement fluctuate subtly. Over extended periods, these fluctuations accumulate, bringing travelers back toward their starting point without intention. In the Amazon, where visibility beyond a short distance is rare, such deviations can occur with surprising ease. Technological aids provide assistance, yet they too depend on satellite signals that weaken under heavy foliage. Handheld devices may require pauses in small clearings to recalibrate accurately. When batteries fail or signals lapse, orientation returns once more to observation and experience. Disorientation here is not dramatic confusion, but gradual uncertainty. The landscape does not announce that one has turned, it simply repeats itself with quiet consistency. Navigation becomes an exercise in disciplined awareness, relying on incremental confirmation rather than sweeping vistas. Within this environment, space feels both intimate and expansive, enclosing and unbounded at once, guiding movement through attention rather than obvious direction. Before the eye adjusts to green, the ear is already at work. Sound in the Amazon does not unfold in separate layers, but in continuous overlap, a textured field of vibration that rarely settles into silence. Insects generate a steady acoustic curtain, high frequencies weaving through lower tones until the air itself seems to shimmer. Cicadas pulse in waves that swell and fade, while smaller species sustain a fine, persistent hum that carries across understory and canopy alike. Bird calls punctuate this background with sharper phrases. Some announce territory in clear whistles that echo between trunks. Others release brief, complex trills that vanish almost as quickly as they arrive. Different heights produce different voices, canopy dwellers projecting across open air above, understory species communicating within more confined ranges. The result is a layered chorus that shifts with time of day, climate, and subtle disturbances in vegetation. As daylight dims, the composition changes rather than diminishes. Night introduces additional performers whose movements are rarely seen but distinctly heard. Frogs contribute rhythmic patterns from hidden pools, and nocturnal mammals rustle through leaf litter with measured steps. Insect activity often intensifies after sunset, creating pulses of volume that rise and fall in unpredictable intervals. Thunder may roll through distant clouds, merging briefly with biological rhythm before receding again. This constant soundscape influences human perception in ways that extend beyond simple awareness. The nervous system, evolved to detect sudden changes against quiet backgrounds, must adapt when background noise remains perpetually high. Subtle signals can be masked by overlapping frequencies, making it difficult to isolate individual movements. A branch breaking or an animal shifting position may blend into the broader acoustic field unless attention is sharply tuned. Research in environmental psychology suggests that sustained auditory density can elevate cognitive load. The brain continues filtering and categorizing input even when conscious focus rests elsewhere. Over time, this effort may contribute to fatigue, especially when combined with heat and physical exertion. Heart rate and stress markers can rise slightly under prolonged sensory demand, even in the absence of explicit threat. For field researchers, this means that listening becomes both tool and challenge. The forest communicates constantly, yet distinguishing meaningful cues requires practice. Experienced guides learn to recognize variations in call patterns that signal predator presence or human approach. Novices often perceive only generalized sound, unable at first to separate one source from another. Within this acoustic environment, quiet is relative rather than absolute. The jungle speaks in overlapping voices, creating a sonic landscape as complex as its biological diversity. Each rustle and resonance contributes to a living composition that surrounds, informs, and occasionally obscures, reminding those who enter that perception here depends as much on interpretation as on hearing itself. Moisture lingers here as a constant companion, settling into fabric, wood, and metal with quiet persistence. In the Amazon, humidity often hovers at levels that leave surfaces never fully dry. Dew forms not only at dawn but throughout the day beneath layered foliage, and evaporation struggles against the surrounding saturation. For scientific instruments designed in temperate laboratories, this atmosphere becomes an unceasing test of endurance. Electronics are particularly vulnerable. Circuit boards contain fine pathways of copper and solder that, when exposed to prolonged moisture, begin to corrode. Even sealed housings can emit microscopic amounts of water vapor over time. Contacts oxidize, screens flicker, and internal sensors drift from calibration. Protective casings and silica desiccants offer some defense, yet they require constant monitoring and replacement. A device functioning reliably in the morning may display erratic behavior by evening. Optical equipment faces its own challenges. Lenses that capture subtle variations in plant structure or animal markings must remain clear and precise. In humid air, condensation forms easily on glass surfaces when temperatures shift slightly. Mold spores, abundant in the forest, settle on damp materials and spread rapidly across lens coatings and rubber seals. Fine filaments bloom almost invisibly at first, then obscure clarity if not cleaned carefully. Storage cases designed to exclude moisture demand regular drying, an ongoing task when sun exposure is limited. Batteries discharge more quickly in sustained heat, reducing the operational window for cameras, recording devices, and navigation tools. Rechargeable units depend on generators or solar panels that may struggle under cloud cover or dense canopy. Managing power becomes an exercise in careful prioritization, deciding which instruments require constant operation and which can rest to conserve energy. Clothing and structural gear also deteriorate under persistent dampness. Fabrics absorb moisture, increasing weight and reducing comfort. Metal fasteners rust, stitching weakens, and adhesives lose cohesion. Paper notebooks soften and warp unless specially treated. Even waterproof materials degrade over time as seams and coatings face continual stress. The implications extend beyond inconvenience. Scientific data collected over weeks may reside on memory cards vulnerable to corrosion or mechanical failure. Samples preserved for later analysis can spoil if storage temperatures fluctuate or containers leak. Field researchers adopt layered precautions, redundant backups, and frequent maintenance routines to safeguard information. Equipment checks become as integral to daily schedules as observation itself. Humidity does not act suddenly or dramatically. It works slowly, settling into components and fibers, reminding visitors that the forest's climate permeates every object within it. Instruments must adapt to this saturation, just as organisms have over generations. In this environment, knowledge advances alongside careful stewardship of tools, each device maintained attentively within air that never truly dries. Movement across the basin rarely follows a straight intention. Paths that appear close on a map unfold into layered journeys measured not only in distance but in coordination. Much of the Amazon remains without permanent roads, not as an oversight, but as a reflection of terrain that shifts, floods, and resists fixed foundations. Where highways exist near urban centers, they fade gradually into narrower tracks and then into footpaths that dissolve beneath vegetation. Rivers serve as the primary corridors of travel through vast portions of the forest. Long wooden boats, fitted with outboard motors, glide along broad channels, then branch into smaller tributaries where depth fluctuates with season. In high water, access expands into flooded forests. In low water, sandbars and exposed routes interrupt navigation. Pilots learn to read subtle changes in current and color, adjusting routes to avoid submerged obstacles that maps may not record. Travel time increases with each narrowing passage. A destination that might seem reachable within hours can require days of upstream progress against steady flow. Fuel must be calculated carefully, carried in sealed containers, and stored with attention to safety and evaporation. Resupply opportunities are limited once beyond larger settlements, and unexpected detours may stretch reserves thin. Helicopters offer alternative access, yet their use introduces additional constraints. Aircraft depend on clearings large enough for safe landing, spaces not always available without environmental disturbance. Range is limited by fuel capacity, and refueling infrastructure remains sparse across interior regions. Weather patterns, already shaped by local atmospheric cycles, may ground flights with little notice. The cost per hour of operation places sustained aerial deployment beyond the reach of many research budgets. Logistics extend beyond transport alone. Equipment, food, medical supplies, and communication devices must travel with teams or await delivery at prearranged sites. Each kilogram adds to fuel demand and handling complexity. Coordinating permits across national and local jurisdictions introduces administrative timelines that must align with seasonal windows. A delayed shipment or missing authorization can postpone an expedition by months. Sustained field missions therefore require not only scientific planning, but financial endurance. Grants must cover transportation, personnel, maintenance, and contingencies for extended stays. Smaller research groups often collaborate to share resources, pooling boat access or establishing joint camps to reduce duplication of cost. These practical limits do not imply inaccessibility, yet they temper ambition with realism. Reaching remote plots, archaeological features, or wildlife corridors demands patience and layered preparation. Progress unfolds gradually, shaped by current, weather, and available infrastructure. Within such constraints, exploration becomes less about speed and more about persistence, advancing through careful arrangement of routes that remain, even then, provisional against a landscape defined by motion. Lines drawn across maps rarely remain visible beneath trees. The Amazon extends across 9 nations: Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. Yet within the forest itself, boundaries are ecological rather than political. Rivers cross from one jurisdiction into another without pause, and species migrate freely across borders established in distant capitals. Still, human governance shapes how and where research may unfold. Remote border regions carry particular complexity. Many lie far from major administrative centers, accessible only by long river journeys or small aircraft. Military posts or customs stations appear intermittently along certain waterways, while other stretches remain lightly monitored. Collaborative scientific projects that span countries must navigate varying regulations, align permits across agencies, and respect local community agreements that differ from one side of a border to another. Large portions of the basin are designated as protected areas, including national parks, biological reserves, and indigenous territories. These designations serve vital conservation goals, preserving habitat and cultural heritage. They also introduce layers of approval before entry. Research teams often submit detailed proposals outlining objectives, methods, and expected impact, awaiting authorization that may require months of review. Community consultations may accompany formal permissions, especially where traditional lands are involved. At the same time, certain remote zones face pressures from illegal mining, logging, or unregulated extraction. Such activities can alter landscapes rapidly, introducing security concerns for scientists and local residents alike. Access routes may pass near contested areas where informal economies operate beyond formal oversight. In these contexts, expedition planning incorporates risk assessment and coordination with regional authorities to ensure safety and transparency. Permit limitations do not arise solely from bureaucracy. They reflect attempts to balance exploration with preservation, recognizing that the cumulative footprint of research, tourism, and development can strain fragile ecosystems. Sampling biological material often requires additional clearances under international agreements governing genetic resources. Exporting specimens for analysis may involve documentation confirming ethical collection and benefit sharing arrangements. Differences in legal frameworks across nations further shape methodology. Data sharing requirements, environmental impact standards, and reporting obligations vary. Multinational research consortia often include partners from several countries to navigate these frameworks collaboratively, fostering scientific exchange alongside compliance. Political context thus becomes another layer through which understanding must pass. It does not stand apart from ecology, but intersects with it, influencing which areas are studied intensively and which remain less accessible. Within the forest's vast continuity, governance introduces structured intervals of permission and protection, guiding the rhythm of inquiry. Exploration proceeds not only along rivers and footpaths, but through agreements and shared responsibility, acknowledging that knowledge develops within social as well as biological systems. In some regions of the basin, absence on the map does not mean absence of life. Beyond established towns and research stations, there are territories where small indigenous groups continue to live with limited or no sustained contact with the outside world. Their presence is known not through direct encounter, but through careful observation from afar, through traces of gardens, temporary structures, and footpaths visible only under certain conditions. Satellite imagery has revealed clearings shaped in deliberate patterns, thatched rooftops arranged around communal spaces, and cultivated plots carved gently from surrounding forest. These glimpses are approached with restraint. Analysts study them from a distance, documenting location without announcing it publicly, recognizing that visibility can bring vulnerability as easily as awareness. National governments and international organizations have established legal protections for many of these territories. Buffer zones restrict entry, and specific agencies oversee policies designed to prevent intrusion. The principle guiding these measures is autonomy, the right of communities to determine their own relationship, or lack of relationship, with broader society. In such areas, scientific curiosity yields to respect for sovereignty. Ethical considerations extend beyond law. Contact with outside visitors carries profound consequences. Even well-intentioned presence can introduce pathogens to which isolated populations have little or no immunity. Historical records from other regions illustrate how respiratory viruses, influenza, and other common illnesses have caused severe outbreaks in communities without prior exposure. The forest that shelters them from many external pressures cannot shield against microscopic transmission carried unknowingly by travelers. Beyond disease, sudden engagement can disrupt social structures and cultural continuity. Material goods, media, and unfamiliar institutions may alter economies and belief systems in unpredictable ways. For researchers, restraint becomes an essential discipline. Data about biodiversity or land use must be gathered without compromising the integrity of these communities' chosen isolation. Monitoring efforts therefore emphasize non intrusive methods. Aerial surveys maintain altitude and distance. Satellite analyses avoid publishing coordinates. Collaboration with contacted indigenous organizations helps align conservation strategies with local priorities. The forest remains shared territory in ecological terms, yet human governance recognizes zones where entry is neither necessary nor appropriate. These ethical barriers do not signify emptiness, but presence of another kind of knowledge. Indigenous groups possess deep understanding of plant cycles, animal behavior, and seasonal change accumulated over generations. Their continued isolation represents a deliberate adaptation rather than an absence of awareness. Within the vast continuity of the Amazon, there are spaces where exploration pauses at an invisible boundary. The commitment to protect these communities affirms that understanding the forest includes honoring those who already inhabit it on their own terms, allowing distance itself to serve as stewardship. Cleared space in the Amazon rarely remains open for long. A patch of sunlight that reaches the forest floor after a tree falls becomes an invitation rather than an absence. Within days, seedlings orient themselves toward the gap. Pioneer species, already waiting in seed banks beneath the soil, respond with accelerated growth. Light filters down, humidity remains high, and nutrients released from decomposing wood circulate quickly through shallow roots. This regenerative pace operates on multiple layers at once. Grasses and herbs appear first, forming thin green veils across exposed ground. Behind them rise young shrubs and saplings, their leaves broad and efficient in capturing sunlight. Vines extend outward in looping arcs, fastening tendrils onto any available support. Within weeks, narrow trails, cut by machete, begin to blur at their edges. The line between passage and forest softens as leaves lean inward from both sides. Fallen trees contribute to this renewal even as they obstruct movement. Their trunks, heavy and damp, become temporary barriers along footpaths and river margins. Fungi colonize bark surfaces in pale clusters, insects tunnel into softened fibers, and moss creeps slowly along shaded crevices. Decomposition advances with steady inevitability, transforming solid wood into nutrient-rich substrate that feeds surrounding growth. What blocks a path today may nourish a future canopy. Human intrusion, when brief, leaves subtle traces that dissipate rapidly. Campsites flattened by boots regain uneven texture as leaf litter accumulates. Small clearings revert as secondary growth interlaces above them. Even survey markers tied to branches may disappear under new foliage or fall when supporting limbs decay. In this climate, maintenance requires repetition. Without periodic trimming, access corridors vanish beneath intertwining stems. Ecologists describe this process as succession, a predictable yet dynamic sequence through which disturbed areas return to complex structure. Species composition shifts over months and years, gradually resembling surrounding forest. The speed of recovery depends on soil condition, moisture, and proximity to intact vegetation, yet the overarching direction remains consistent toward enclosure rather than exposure. For researchers, this vitality demands flexibility. Sites revisited after a single season may require reestablishing entry points. Equipment stored too long without elevation risks engulfment by creeping plants or moisture driven decay. Documentation becomes essential, preserving records of spaces that may look entirely different upon return. The forest does not regard openings as permanent alterations. Instead, it absorbs them into ongoing cycles of growth and decay. Sunlight that briefly illuminates bare ground becomes fuel for renewal, and pathways once distinct dissolve back into layered green. Biological growth here operates not as a slow drift, but as a steady reclaiming force, reshaping edges until distinction fades and continuity resumes. Change in the Amazon does not always announce itself with spectacle. Sometimes it arrives as an absence, a delayed rain, a river that runs lower than memory expects. Over recent decades, climatological records have shown shifts in precipitation patterns across parts of the basin. Extended dry seasons in certain regions now appear more frequently, influenced by warming ocean temperatures and altered atmospheric circulation. What was once a dependable rhythm of wet and less wet months begins to stretch and compress in unfamiliar ways. Drought cycles, intensified during particular climate oscillations, reduce soil moisture and stress vegetation adapted to near constant humidity. Trees that rely on steady water uptake experience hydraulic strain, closing stomata to conserve moisture and slowing photosynthesis. Some species shed leaves earlier than usual, thinning canopy cover and allowing additional sunlight to reach the forest floor. This subtle brightening can alter understory conditions, influencing which plants regenerate successfully. Fire, historically uncommon in much of the humid core, becomes more likely when drought lingers. Dry leaf litter accumulates, and edges near deforested areas provide ignition points from agricultural burns or accidental sparks. Flames that enter intact forest often creep slowly along the ground, damaging bark and roots without producing towering infernos. Even low-intensity burns can weaken trees, making them susceptible to disease and delayed mortality in subsequent seasons. Rainfall shifts also complicate hydrological patterns. Some tributaries fluctuate more dramatically between high and low stages, affecting aquatic habitats and navigation routes. Flood timing can advance or recede, challenging species whose life cycles synchronize with predictable water levels. Agricultural communities at forest margins adjust planting schedules as they interpret new patterns in cloud formation and river rise. For scientists attempting to map ecological stability, such variability introduces moving baselines. Data collected over a decade may reflect conditions already evolving. Remote sensing images capture snapshots of canopy density or moisture stress. Yet, interpreting trends requires long-term monitoring across vast terrain. Subtle declines in tree health may appear only after repeated surveys, and distinguishing climate-driven change from local disturbance demands careful analysis. Dynamic change does not erase the forest, but it layers uncertainty onto systems once regarded as relatively constant. Adaptive capacity exists within biodiversity, yet thresholds remain under study. Researchers combine climate models with field observations to anticipate future trajectories, acknowledging that projections must remain flexible as feedback loops unfold. In this context, the Amazon becomes both subject and participant in global climate processes. Alterations in temperature and precipitation ripple through plant physiology, species interactions, and fire regimes. Mapping such a living, shifting landscape requires patience with uncertainty, recognizing that stability here has always been nuanced, and that current transformations add another dimension to its ongoing evolution. Invisible exchanges occur here every second. While leaves draw in carbon dioxide from the air, trunks and roots transform it into living structure, storing carbon within wood that may stand for centuries. Across the vast breadth of the Amazon basin, this cumulative process has made the forest one of the largest terrestrial carbon sinks on Earth. Billions of trees act together as a reservoir, moderating atmospheric composition through the quiet arithmetic of photosynthesis. Carbon does not reside only in towering stems. It settles within roots that extend through soil, within fallen branches slowly decomposing, and within the rich layer of organic matter that blankets the ground. Even wetlands and peat-rich zones hold significant stores, preserving carbon in waterlogged conditions that slow decay. The balance between uptake and release shifts seasonally and regionally, influenced by temperature, rainfall, and disturbance. Measuring this immense reservoir presents practical challenges. Estimating biomass requires translating trunk diameter, height, and wood density into carbon equivalents using allometric equations refined through decades of sampling. Field plots, scattered across the basin, provide ground truth data, yet their distribution remains uneven due to accessibility constraints. A plot of a few hectares must represent conditions that may vary widely across hundreds of kilometers. Remote sensing technologies assist by offering broader perspective. Satellite instruments detect canopy height, leaf area, and reflectance patterns linked to vegetation health. Radar and laser altimetry help infer structural complexity, translating vertical profiles into biomass estimates. Yet even these advanced tools encounter limits beneath dense foliage and persistent cloud cover. Algorithms must interpret signals influenced by moisture, species, composition, and topography, introducing uncertainty that researchers work continuously to reduce. Disturbance complicates calculations further. Selective logging, fire, and drought can reduce carbon storage in localized areas, while secondary growth in recovering zones increases it over time. Determining whether the basin as a whole absorbs more carbon than it emits in a given year requires integrating data across political boundaries and ecological gradients. Small percentage changes, when multiplied across millions of square kilometers, translate into significant atmospheric consequences. Understanding this dynamic matters beyond regional conservation. Carbon stored within Amazonian forests influences global climate trajectories, interacting with emissions from industry and land use elsewhere. If the forest weakens as a sink due to prolonged drought or continued clearing, atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases may rise more rapidly. Conversely, maintaining forest integrity supports planetary climate regulation. The Amazon's role in carbon cycling thus connects local processes to global systems. Each leaf contributes modestly, yet together they form a vast living buffer. Measuring and protecting this function requires sustained observation and international collaboration, acknowledging that what happens beneath this canopy reverberates through the shared atmosphere above. Movement here often leaves no visible trace. A ripple fades before it can be followed. A footprint softens beneath leaf litter within hours. Among the most compelling inhabitants of the Amazon are animals rarely seen directly, not because they are few, but because they move within layers that conceal them almost perfectly. River dolphins surface briefly in muddy currents, their pale bodies visible for a moment before slipping back beneath opaque water. Jaguars pass through dense undergrowth with deliberate silence, their patterned coats dissolving into mottled light. These apex species occupy territories shaped by water depth, prey distribution, and seasonal change. River dolphins navigate labyrinthine channels and flooded forests, relying on echolocation to interpret surroundings that human eyes cannot penetrate. Their presence is often confirmed through fleeting exhalations at the surface or through acoustic recordings that capture clicks reverberating through submerged roots. Direct observation remains uncommon, constrained by turbidity and vast aquatic range. Jaguars, as top terrestrial predators, maintain wide territories that may span dozens of kilometers. They traverse riverbanks, swamps, and elevated ridges in search of capybara, peccary, and other prey. Thick vegetation limits long-distance visibility, and the animals themselves prefer twilight or nocturnal activity. Even experienced trackers may follow prints for hours before losing them where ground hardens or floods obscure impressions. Camera traps have expanded understanding of these elusive residents, yet their reach is selective. Devices positioned along game trails or near water crossings capture valuable images, revealing individual patterns and behaviors. Still, placement depends on prediction, and large tracts remain unsampled. Batteries and memory cards must withstand humidity and heat, and even small shifts in animal routes can reduce detection rates. A jaguar may pass a few meters beyond a camera's narrow field and remain unseen. River dolphins present further difficulty for automated monitoring. Underwater cameras struggle in sediment-rich water, and acoustic sensors require careful calibration to differentiate dolphin signals from ambient noise. Population estimates, therefore, rely on surface counts and statistical modeling, approaches that incorporate uncertainty alongside data. Apex predators often serve as indicators of ecosystem health, their presence suggesting sufficient prey and intact habitat. Yet their elusiveness complicates precise assessment. Absence of evidence does not necessarily indicate absence of the species. It may reflect the limits of observation within such intricate terrain. Within the Amazon, mystery is not a sign of emptiness, but of layered adaptation. Animals that command food webs do so quietly, threading between water and forest with practiced economy of motion. Knowledge of them accumulates gradually through tracks, recordings, and rare glimpses, each fragment contributing to a portrait that remains partial, shaped by patience and respect for beings that move just beyond clear sight. Beneath every towering trunk lies an architecture as intricate as the canopy above. Roots extend outward in wide, shallow webs rather than plunging deeply, adapting to soils where nutrients concentrate near the surface. Fine rootlets branch repeatedly, forming dense matrices that explore thin layers of organic matter. In this narrow band, life depends on connection rather than depth. Interlaced with these roots are fungal hyphae, threads so slender they measure in microns, yet capable of spanning meters through the soil. Mycorrhizal fungi attach to roots and expand their reach, absorbing phosphorus and other minerals that plant tissue alone would struggle to access. In exchange, trees provide carbohydrates produced through photosynthesis. This partnership is not isolated between individual plant and fungus, but part of wider networks linking multiple species. Through these shared pathways, nutrients move from one organism to another. Experimental studies in temperate forests have shown carbon transferred between trees through common fungal networks, and evidence suggests similar exchanges may occur in tropical systems. Seedlings growing in shade may receive support from established neighbors via connected fungi, allowing them to persist until light increases. Signals related to stress or herbivory can travel through root-associated pathways, priming nearby plants to adjust chemical defenses. Such underground communication unfolds silently and without visible markers. The soil appears uniform from above, yet beneath it lies a shifting mosaic of microbial and plant interactions. Networks expand and contract as roots grow, die, and decompose. Seasonal moisture alters fungal activity, influencing which pathways remain active at a given time. The system resembles a living fabric woven from organic threads, continually repaired and rearranged. Research into these subterranean networks remains limited by practical constraints. Excavating roots disrupts the very structures scientists aim to observe. Isolating fungal species requires careful sampling and laboratory cultivation, processes complicated by the immense diversity already noted in microbial communities. Genetic sequencing offers glimpses into community composition, yet translating sequence data into functional understanding demands further experimentation. In tropical soils, especially, overlapping species interactions create complexity that resists simple modeling. Multiple fungal partners may associate with a single tree, and the same fungal lineage may connect different plant species. Nutrient exchange likely varies according to context, influenced by light availability, soil chemistry, and water content. Controlled field experiments are challenging to maintain in remote, humid conditions. Despite these obstacles, the evidence gathered so far points toward cooperative dynamics that shape forest resilience. The underground realm supports regeneration, buffers nutrient scarcity, and stabilizes ecosystem function. What appears as independent trees above ground may in fact be participants in shared resource systems below. Understanding these networks requires patience and refined tools, acknowledging that much of the forest's coordination occurs out of sight, within soil that hums quietly with connection. Darkness settles here without interruption. Once the last trace of twilight fades above the canopy, there are no distant city glows, no highway lights diffused along the horizon. The sky, when briefly visible through narrow openings, deepens into dense black scattered with stars that seem sharper in the absence of artificial glare. Beneath the trees, however, even starlight rarely penetrates. The understory becomes a layered shadow where outlines soften and depth collapses. Human vision, reliant on contrast, adjusts slowly. Shapes that appeared distinct during daylight merge into silhouettes. The forest floor, uneven and woven with roots, requires careful footing when seen only in shades of gray. Even a modest clearing may offer little orientation, as trunks stand as darker vertical columns against an already dark background. Artificial headlamps provide limited cones of illumination, but beyond their reach, space withdraws into obscurity. Yet, night does not diminish life here, it redistributes activity. Many species remain diurnal, resting in concealed nests or high branches. Others begin their movements precisely as darkness thickens. Nocturnal predators, such as owls and certain small cats, navigate with heightened sensory acuity. Their eyes, adapted to low light, gather faint reflections and convert them into detail where humans perceive blur. Bats trace intricate paths above and between trunks, guided by echolocation pulses inaudible to most ears. Along decaying logs, a different kind of light sometimes appears. Certain fungi emit a faint green glow through biochemical reactions involving luciferin-like compounds. This bioluminescence, subtle and easily overlooked, may attract insects that assist in spore dispersal. Against the black of surrounding soil and leaf litter, these glows resemble scattered embers rather than flames, small reminders that even darkness contains its own sources of illumination. Sound also shifts character at night. Insects sustain rhythmic patterns, while frogs project calls across hidden pools. Occasional rustling signals movement in leaf litter, though distance and direction become difficult to judge without visual confirmation. For those unaccustomed to such immersion, the combination of reduced sight and layered sound can amplify uncertainty. Depth perception narrows, and familiar pathways feel altered under limited light. Scientific work after sunset requires recalibration. Surveys of nocturnal species depend on quiet approach and careful beam placement to avoid disturbance. Equipment must be handled attentively, as misplaced items are challenging to locate without daylight reference. Camp routines adapt to shorter visual range, with cooking and note taking completed under controlled lighting. Night in the deep Amazon does not erase the forest's complexity. It reveals another dimension of it, one where perception adjusts and alternative senses guide movement. Within this enveloping dark, ecosystems continue their intricate exchanges, largely unseen yet undiminished, sustained by rhythms that unfold beyond the reach of human sight alone. Solitude in the Amazon carries a different weight than quiet in open country. Days may pass without encountering another research team or nearby settlement, the horizon enclosed by foliage rather than distance. Communication depends on intermittent signals carried by satellite devices, and messages often arrive delayed. In such settings, isolation becomes less about physical separation and more about the narrowing of familiar reference points. Heat adds a steady physical demand. Even when shade moderates direct sunlight, humidity prevents efficient evaporation of sweat. The body works continuously to regulate temperature, and fatigue accumulates quietly. Hydration must be monitored with care, as dehydration and heat exhaustion can develop gradually beneath routines that feel manageable at first. Researchers pace their movements, scheduling intensive tasks during cooler hours, yet the overall environment maintains a persistent warmth that rarely relents. Sensory experience compounds this strain. Visual uniformity, layered sound, and constant moisture create a field of input that does not fully diminish even at rest. The nervous system remains alert to subtle shifts in light, motion, or noise, maintaining vigilance against hazards already discussed. Over extended periods, this heightened attention can translate into mental fatigue. Concentration wavers, decision-making slows, and small frustrations magnify in significance. Historical expedition accounts from early naturalists and explorers describe similar responses, though expressed in different language. Journals recount days of heavy labor carving paths through undergrowth, nights interrupted by insects and shifting weather, and the emotional oscillation between wonder and weariness. Some narratives speak of disorientation not only in geography but in time, as repetitive green landscapes blurred the sense of progress. Modern teams prepare with training and structured schedules designed to mitigate stress, rotating responsibilities, maintaining clear communication within groups, and setting realistic goals help stabilize morale. Still, the forest remains an environment that tests resilience. Minor setbacks, such as equipment failure or weather delays, can feel amplified when departure is weeks away and access to outside support is limited. Psychologists studying expeditionary environments note that confined, demanding settings often require strong interpersonal cohesion. Shared purpose and mutual support serve as protective factors against isolation, stress. Within the Amazon, collaborative effort becomes not only a scientific necessity, but an emotional one. The psychological toll does not diminish the value of exploration. Rather, It underscores the magnitude of the setting. The forest's scale and sensory density ask for patience and endurance, qualities cultivated over time rather than assumed at entry. In acknowledging these effects, researchers adapt practices that honor both ecological complexity and human limits, sustaining inquiry within a landscape that shapes minds as steadily as it shapes land. Long before satellite imagery and coordinated research teams, the Amazon existed in the imagination of distant societies as both promise and enigma. Early European explorers entered the basin by river, guided by incomplete charts and accounts passed along trade routes. Their vessels moved slowly against powerful currents, dependent on local knowledge that was not always fully understood or respected. Journeys intended to redraw maps often ended in ambiguity, with reports that contradicted one another and coordinates that failed to align upon return. Mapping attempts in those centuries relied on compass readings, rudimentary instruments, and observation of landmarks that shifted with flood and growth. Rivers branched and rejoined in patterns difficult to trace without aerial perspective. Tributaries, once believed to lead toward specific destinations, veered into unexpected terrain, and accounts of distance were distorted by current speed and fatigue. Cartographers working in Europe stitched together fragmented notes, producing representations that carried as much conjecture as measurement. Mortality during certain 19th century expeditions reflected the cumulative risks already described across this landscape. Heat, disease, malnutrition, and conflict intersected in ways that overwhelmed unprepared crews. Supplies spoiled under humidity, and communication with coastal settlements could disappear for months. Records from some ventures mention significant loss of life, though precise figures remain uncertain due to incomplete documentation. Survivors returned with journals stained by weather and hardship, their narratives alternating between fascination and exhaustion. Progress moved slowly, not because curiosity was lacking, but because tools and infrastructure constrained possibility. Without reliable medical treatment for tropical diseases, recovery from illness depended largely on resilience and chance. River travel required physical labor at portages and rapids, and constructing inland routes demanded continuous clearing through regrowth that quickly reclaimed opened passages. Scientific equipment, delicate even in temperate climates, deteriorated rapidly in damp heat. In many cases, explorers underestimated the scale and variability of the basin. Plans built on assumptions drawn from more predictable landscapes faltered when confronted with layered waterways and resilient vegetation. Indigenous knowledge, when incorporated respectfully, improved navigation and survival. When ignored, the forest's rhythms proved unforgiving. These historical efforts nonetheless contributed to gradual accumulation of understanding. Specimens collected, languages documented, and river courses charted provided foundations for later research. Failures and setbacks revealed practical lessons that informed subsequent expeditions, encouraging more collaborative approaches and improved preparation. The history of exploration in the Amazon is therefore marked by persistence rather than conquest. Maps grew more detailed over time, yet always retained margins of uncertainty. Each attempt illuminated a fragment of the basin while acknowledging how much remained beyond immediate reach, shaped by conditions that required patience, adaptation, and humility. Screens now display the forest in ways early explorers could not have imagined. High-resolution satellite imagery traces river channels, monitors deforestation fronts, and measures canopy greenness across seasons. Synthetic aperture radar penetrates cloud cover to reveal structural patterns beneath persistent weather systems. Light detection and ranging instruments carried by aircraft and occasionally by drones, send pulses downward and reconstruct vertical profiles of vegetation with remarkable precision. From these tools, scientists generate digital models that estimate canopy height, biomass distribution, and even subtle topographic features hidden below foliage. Remote sensing allows comparison across years, highlighting areas of stress or recovery without requiring constant physical presence. Where access once demanded months of travel, data can now arrive within hours to researchers scattered across continents. Unmanned aerial vehicles add another layer of flexibility. Lightweight drones maneuver along river corridors and above forest gaps, capturing imagery at resolutions fine enough to distinguish individual tree crowns. Thermal sensors detect variations in surface temperature linked to water stress or animal presence. Acoustic recording devices mounted beneath drones gather soundscapes from above canopy height, supplementing ground surveys with new perspective. Artificial intelligence assists in interpreting the vast streams of information generated by these technologies. Machine learning algorithms classify species from camera trap images, identify vocalizations in continuous audio recordings, and detect patterns in satellite data that might escape manual inspection. Training data sets assembled from field verified observations enable automated recognition at scales previously impractical. Yet, technological capability does not dissolve every constraint. Dense canopy still obscures direct visual confirmation of many ground level processes. LiDAR pulses, though powerful, provide structural outlines rather than detailed species identification. Satellite sensors capture surface reflectance, but translating spectral signatures into accurate ecological conditions requires calibration and context. Ground truthing remains essential. Field teams verify remote observations, measuring tree diameters, collecting soil samples, and confirming species presence. Without these reference points, digital interpretations risk oversimplification. Instruments also encounter familiar challenges. Humidity affects electronics, battery life limits, drone flights, and cloud cover can reduce optical clarity. Access to technology varies across regions and institutions, shaping who can deploy advanced systems. Processing large data sets demands computational infrastructure and expertise that may not be evenly distributed among research centers. Collaboration becomes necessary to integrate remote insights with local knowledge and on the ground observation. Technology expands vision, extending awareness across broad territories. It accelerates detection of change and refines estimates that inform conservation strategies. Still, the forest retains complexity that resists complete capture. Data layers accumulate, offering clarity in some dimensions while revealing new questions in others. Modern tools illuminate patterns once invisible, yet they operate within a living system whose variability continues beyond the reach of any single method. There are gaps that do not appear as empty spaces, but as margins of quiet uncertainty. Even after centuries of observation, the Amazon still contains dimensions that resist full accounting. Field notes accumulate, satellite archives expand, and databases grow. Yet beyond each new entry lies another layer awaiting recognition. Undocumented species remain among the most immediate unknowns. Botanists continue to describe new trees and understory plants from regions that have been visited before but never sampled exhaustively. Entomologists uncover beetles, ants, and flies that differ subtly from known relatives, distinguishable only through careful morphological comparison or genetic analysis. Amphibians and small mammals, active within narrow habitat ranges, evade detection until surveys align with seasonal patterns that reveal their presence. River systems, though charted in their main courses, branch into smaller channels that shift with sediment and flood. Some tributaries change direction over years. Others fragment into networks that appear and disappear according to rainfall. High-resolution mapping has refined understanding of major waterways, yet interior creeks and seasonal streams remain imperfectly documented, especially where vegetation and cloud cover complicate observation from above. Microclimates form across variations in elevation, soil type, and canopy density. Within short distances, temperature and humidity can differ enough to influence species composition. A ridge, exposed to slightly stronger airflow, may host different plants than a nearby hollow where moisture lingers. Such fine-scale variation challenges broad generalizations drawn from limited plots, reminding researchers that averages conceal diversity in detail. Fungal diversity, hinted at through genetic sequencing, likely extends far beyond cataloged species. Many fungi are known only from environmental DNA fragments, their physical forms unseen. Their roles in decomposition, nutrient exchange, and disease remain partially inferred. Culturing these organisms in laboratories proves difficult, as conditions required for growth may not replicate natural substrates precisely. Measurement itself depends upon method. Sampling protocols must balance thoroughness with feasibility, and no single survey captures entire complexity. Data sets, however large, represent filtered views shaped by instrument sensitivity and research focus. As new techniques emerge, previous conclusions may be refined rather than overturned, adding nuance to existing models. Scientific humility becomes less a philosophical stance and more a practical necessity. Acknowledging incomplete knowledge guides careful interpretation and cautious projection. The forest has already demonstrated capacity to surprise through hidden cities, shifting waterways, and layered ecological networks. It continues to do so through subtler means, inviting incremental discovery rather than final definition. What remains unmeasured is not a sign of failure, but an indication of scale and intricacy. The Amazon's living systems extend beyond current resolution, unfolding across timeframes longer than individual careers. Within this vastness, inquiry proceeds steadily, aware that understanding grows in chapters, each illuminating part of a landscape that still holds more than can be fully counted. Control is a concept that fades here. Systems overlap and interlock across scales so broad and so fine that any single map captures only a fraction of their motion. The Amazon is not a fixed backdrop awaiting description, but a dynamic, self-renewing network shaped by growth, decay, flood, drought, migration, and succession. Trees rise, fall, and return through seedlings nourished by the remains of earlier generations. Rivers redraw their channels, fungi dismantle fallen wood, animals redistribute seeds in patterns that ripple outward through time. This continuity does not move in straight lines. Feedback loops connect canopy to soil, water to atmosphere, predator to prey. A season of reduced rainfall alters flowering cycles. Shifts in flowering influence insect abundance. Insect abundance affects bird populations. Each relationship interacts with others, forming nested systems that resist reduction to a single diagram. Complexity here scales not only across distance, but across process. Efforts to chart and catalog the basin encounter this layered motion at every stage. Static boundaries on paper cannot fully represent corridors that expand and contract with water levels. Classifications of habitat, while useful, simplify gradients that exist without abrupt edges. Even the most refined digital models translate living variability into manageable categories. Exploration, then, becomes less about imposing order and more about listening for pattern within change. Scientific practice adapts accordingly, integrating long term monitoring with flexible methods capable of responding to unforeseen variation. Conservation strategies incorporate recognition that protection must account for movement and resilience rather than preserving a frozen snapshot. Balancing inquiry with preservation introduces ethical considerations. Data collection can inform management, yet intrusion carries cost if not carefully designed. Establishing protected areas, collaborating with indigenous communities, and regulating extraction represent attempts to align knowledge with stewardship. The aim is not mastery in the traditional sense, but coexistence guided by evidence. Within such a system, humility is not resignation. It is acknowledgement that understanding deepens over generations and that ecosystems of this scale exceed any final inventory. The forest's resistance to complete control emerges from its vitality, from processes continually unfolding beyond the duration of individual studies. Perhaps the enduring lesson is that exploration has limits defined not by failure of effort, but by respect for scale. Some dimensions of the Amazon will remain partially unresolved, not because they are inaccessible, but because they participate in cycles too intricate for total capture. Knowledge accumulates in layers, illuminating pathways while leaving space for the unknown. In that space, the forest continues its self renewing rhythm, vast enough to sustain mystery alongside discovery.